The stars above Cadia were bleeding, not in the way mortal eyes could witness, but in the manner that spoke to the soul, as if the firmament itself wept for what was about to be lost. The eye of terror pulsed, a malignant wound in the heavens, its light staining the void in shades no sane mind would name. In its shadow, the fortress world of Cadia clung stubbornly to life, battered by centuries of siege, scarred by wars that had never truly ended. But this was different. This time, the sky burned with an anger older than the Imperium itself. Even the void seemed to lean closer, as though the galaxy itself wished to watch Cadia die. Orbital debris drifted like broken crowns, the remnants of ships that had once carried proud banners into battle. Now they were nothing more than tombs, silent and frozen, their crews long gone to dust or worse. From the planet's surface, the sky was a tapestry of fire, a ceaseless reminder that the world was ringed by fleets, locked in their own grim ballet of death. It is in this crucible of inevitability that we find our tale, and it is here, on the edge of hope and ruin, that we speak to you. You who walk this moment with us, you are not alone. We tell you now, truly and without hesitation, that we love you. You matter. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. He stood upon the highest battlement of Casa Myrak, his armour reflecting the oily light of the eye above. Lord Castellan Marius Rane, last son of his bloodline, commander of the Cadian 117th, and sworn defender of this world, felt the cold creep not from the wind, but from within. His life had been spent for the Imperium. Every breath, every friend buried in the black soil of Cadia, every scar across his body was proof of his service. And yet, as the shadow of the 13th Black Crusade fell upon the planet, he could not shake the sense that all of it had been in vain. The air was sharp with promethium smoke and the distant percussion of artillery. Each impact reverberated through the bones of the fortress like the heartbeat of some dying giant. Below, the streets seethed with movement, tanks rumbling into position, columns of shock troopers marching through ash-filled air, civilians shuttled into subterranean vaults. It was a choreography Rane knew by heart. But there was no comfort in familiarity. This time, the enemy was not here to harry the walls or test the garrison. This time, they meant to end Cadia. He rested his gauntleted hands on the cold stone, staring at the horizon. Somewhere beyond those clouds of smoke, beyond the endless forests of shattered pylons, Abaddon's fleets gathered like carrion birds. Rane's thoughts wandered to the Emperor, the master he had never seen, the voice he had only ever heard in the prayers of priests and the fanatical rallying cries of commissars. Was this truly the Emperor's will, to hold Cadia until every son and daughter was dead? Or had they been sacrificed long ago, their fate sealed in some shadowed chamber on Terra? The memory of a voice came unbidden, deep, calm, and heavy with the weight of truth. Not all who stand beside you are with you, Marius. It was the warning of Sister Veris, a militant hospitaller who had fought alongside his troops on Armageddon. At the time, he had dismissed it as battlefield paranoia. Now, with whispers of betrayal in the air, he wondered if she had seen something in him, or in those closest to him. The clank of approaching boots pulled him from his thoughts. It was Colonel Darrick Venn, his second in command, and the closest thing to a friend the war had left him. Venn's face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. The 8th and 12th are falling back to the second line, Venn reported. Losses are significant. He hesitated, then added, "We've also picked up a signal. Short burst, encrypted. Imperial Navy code, but old. Very old." Rane's gaze narrowed. "From where?" "Out past the outer ring, near the debris fields of the Iron Crucible." That graveyard of ships had been silent for decades, ever since the battles of the 10th Crusade. For a signal to come from there now, it meant something had survived, or something was pretending it had. "Bring it to my quarters," Rane said, his voice low, "and keep it quiet." The wind shifted, carrying with it the low hum of the pylons, the ancient cyclopean structures that anchored Cadia against the eye's touch. Their presence was a constant background to life on the planet, a vibration one ceased to notice after years of living here. But now, something was different. The hum faltered, barely perceptible, like a skipped heartbeat. Rane turned his gaze to the nearest pylon, its black stone surface unscarred by millennia of war. To see it waver in its song was unsettling, as though the very bones of the world were shuddering. By nightfall, the fortress was alight with preparations. Vox relays barked orders into the choking dark, servitors trundled along the walls carrying ammunition, and squads rotated in and out of the front lines. Above it all, the aurora of the eye rippled unnaturally, casting the battlefield in shifting colors that played tricks on the mind. Shapes moved within the light, some too vast to be real, others disturbingly human. In his private quarters, Rane studied the recovered signal. It was fractured, filled with static and distortion, but the cadence of the words was unmistakable, the formal, deliberate tones of an Imperial Navy officer. "Adia, to hold, to the Emperor, we are coming." The final word was drowned in noise, but it was enough to ignite a dangerous spark in the heart of any soldier. Hope. Ven leaned against the wall, arms crossed. If it's real, they're late to the war. If it's not, it's bait. Rane nodded, slowly. Either way, it means someone out there knows we're still fighting. But the question that would not leave him was whether that someone wanted Cadia to endure, or to fall. The night deepened. Artillery fire painted the horizon in strobes of orange and white. Rane returned to the battlements, where the wind carried with it the mingled scents of ozone, promethium, and blood. He closed his eyes and listened, to the guns, to the faint hum of the pylons, to the pulse of the eye in the sky above. And in that moment, he thought he could hear something else, a whisper, faint and cold, threading through the din of battle. It spoke no words, but the intent was clear. The end has begun. Far to the west, beyond the sight of Cadia's sentries, the eye flared, and for the briefest instant, a dark shape moved across it, vast enough to blot out constellations. Rane's fingers tightened on the stone. Somewhere deep within him, something broke. The siege had begun. The morning after the first flares of the siege was heavy with ash. The skies over Casa Mirac carried the bruised colors of a perpetual dawn. The sun filtered through smoke thick enough to turn its light into a dull, dying ember. To a Cadian, such skies were not a herald of change. They were the backdrop of life. But this morning felt different. The air tasted older, fouler, as though the very breath of the planet carried the weight of ancient doom. Lord Castellan Marius Rane stood at the map table in the command bunker, its surface alive with hololithic projections of the warfront. Thin lines of green marked defensive perimeters, while swathes of crimson bled inward from every direction. The crimson moved slowly, but it moved without pause. Colonel Ven was already there, his fingers drumming on the table's edge as he studied a collapsing section of the western line. "The 18th Kasserkin held through the night," he reported, "but they're at half strength. The 54th Armoured is pinned. If they can't break out, we lose the flank." Rane didn't answer at once. His eyes were fixed on the slow rotation of the holomap, on the way the crimson tide pressed in, as though the enemy were less an army and more a living organism, constricting, tightening, suffocating. "They'll hold," he said at last, "or they'll die where they stand. The line cannot break." The words were iron, but he felt the weight of them settling in his chest. He thought of the faces of the men and women holding those lines, people who had known no life but war, whose childhoods had been measured in firing drills and survival exercises. They would not abandon their posts, but neither would the enemy grant them mercy. A new voice joined them, one soft, yet carrying a strange resonance that seemed to cut through the low hum of the bunker. "You speak as though the lines are yours to command," said Lieutenant Kalara Maroth, the company psyker. Her pale eyes seemed to see beyond the sea holomap, beyond the walls themselves. "But the enemy's hands are already within your walls," Ven scoffed. "Cryptic as always. Care to explain, Lieutenant?" Her gaze shifted to him, and for a moment Ven's confidence faltered. "The shadows are moving," she said. "In the casas, in the barracks, even here. You won't see them until they take what they've come for." She turned to Rane. "You felt it too." He didn't deny it. In the quiet moments, when the guns fell silent for brief interludes, he'd sensed something. Off. Not fear, but a weight. A pressure that was not the eyes light above, but something colder and nearer. Before he could respond, the Vox array sputtered with a burst of static, followed by the clipped tones of Captain Helran at the outer perimeter. "Command, this is Outer Ring West. Enemy armor sighted, multiple vectors, requesting." The transmission cut, replaced by the sharp bark of lasfire and the low roar of something mechanical. Ven leaned in, adjusting the controls. "Helran, repeat your last." The only answer was a scream, distant and distorted, before the channel went dead. Minutes later, reports flooded in. Breaches along the western defense. Enemy forces spilling into the second line. The 54th Armoured had been annihilated. Orders flew from Rane's lips as he moved toward the surface. "Pull the 22nd from the northern trench. Redeploy to the west. Civilians in sectors G through J are to be evacuated to Vault 7. Seal all mag lifts to the outer wall. And someone find me the rival commander." That commander, General Kyle Dravik of the 3rd Cadian Armoured, was conspicuously absent from the command post. Dravik had been a thorn in Rane's side since the first day of the siege. His appetite for risk matched only by his disdain for coordinated defense. It was his unapproved maneuvers in the early hours that had left the western flank vulnerable. Rane intended to confront him, if Dravik was even still on the battlefield. When Rane emerged onto the fortress wall, the world outside was unrecognizable. Plumes of fire tore upward where artillery shells had struck fuel depots. The distant ridges were shrouded in a rolling tide of smoke, out of which the silhouettes of enemy war machines lumbered forward. Vast, hulking shapes that shimmered with the unnatural sheen of the warp. Between them swarmed masses of traitor infantry, their banners defiled, their armor marked by the symbols of the dark gods. And among them, flashes of gold and crimson, Chaos Space Marines, veterans of the Long War, older than Cadia itself, each one worth a dozen mortal soldiers. The wall shook beneath the first salvo from the enemy's long-range guns. Stone cracked and splintered under the impact. Soldiers scrambled along the parapets, returning fire in disciplined volleys. Somewhere down the line, a heavy bolter roared defiantly until a second shell silenced it. Ven appeared at Rain's side, shouting over the din. "We can't hold the West without armor. Dravik's division was supposed to reinforce them hours ago." Rane scanned the chaos below, but saw no sign of Dravik's distinctive command tank. "Find him," he said. His voice was calm, but there was iron in it now. "If he's abandoned his post, I want to know why." Maroth joined them, her face pale, lips moving in a whisper that did not match the rhythm of the battle around them. Rane caught fragments, shadows, hollow eyes, betrayal in plain sight. Then came the sound that turned the defense from a desperate stand into a rout, the cracking, thunderous collapse of Casa Doran's outer gate. The enemy poured through in a black wave, tearing into the defenders with chain blades and plasma fire. The Vox channels erupted with frantic calls for support, for reinforcements, for the Emperor's mercy. Rane knew then that the day's battle was already lost. The West had fallen, and whatever enemy lay outside Cadia's walls, there was another, quieter and closer, already working to finish the job from within. The western flank had fallen, and with it, the illusion of safety Cadia had maintained for centuries. Lord Castellan Marius Rane moved through the command corridors with the weight of inevitability pressing against his shoulders. The air smelled of scorched stone, promethium, and something fouler. The metallic tang of blood mingled with fear. Even the ventilators seemed to shudder under the strain, pushing ash-laden air that scratched at lungs and spirits alike. Colonel Ven was already at the hololithic map table when Rane arrived. His face was pale beneath the harsh illumination of flickering tactical displays. The western line has collapsed entirely. Casualty reports are incomplete, but estimates suggest over 40% losses. Armor destroyed or immobilized, civilians unaccounted for. He hesitated, glancing at Rane with a look that asked what words could not. Rane's jaw tightened. "And Dravik? He's nowhere to be found." The absence of the rival commander gnawed at him like a festering wound. Dravik's reputation for unpredictability had been whispered about for decades. Yet, in the crucible of war, one had to hope for loyalty above all else, to know that he might have abandoned the West. The thought was corrosive. A soft hum grew in the air, subtle but insistent. Rane turned. Lieutenant Solara Maroth stepped into the room, her robe streaked with ash and dust, eyes reflecting the pale glow of the tactical displays. "I have seen them," she said quietly, the shadows moving within the walls. Ven gave her a sharp look. "Care to explain? We have troops dying outside, Lieutenant, and you talk of shadows." Maroth's gaze held Rane's. Not soldiers, not machines. Something older, watching, waiting. The traitor is among us, Marius, and not all who walk these halls wear the face of Cadia. Rane swallowed. His mind raced through the list of officers, the faces he trusted, the ones he had trained alongside, the ones whose loyalty he had counted on. Could it be that in the chaos, one of them had already chosen to betray the Imperium? The thought was poison, and yet he could not shake it. The Vox relay crackled, a fragmented transmission breaking through the static. "Cadia. Hold. Imperial Navy. Survivors. Outer. Iron Crucible." The signal was barely coherent, but it confirmed what Rane had feared. Help might exist, though it was delayed, cryptic, and shrouded in uncertainty. "It comes from the debris fields," Ven said, "near the Iron Crucible. But there is no active fleet there, only wreckage." Rane's hand clenched the edge of the map table. Then it's either a trick, or someone is trying to tell us the truth. Or a warning, Maroth added. I have seen it in the warp visions. The path is not clear. There is blood on Cadia's walls, yes, but the greater threat is within. The words cut deeper than any laser gun or artillery strike. To fight the enemy outside while another waited inside was a nightmare beyond preparation. Rane's thoughts turned immediately to the officers absent from the command post. Dravik, Major Hethran of the 22nd Kasserkin, even the advisors he had relied upon since his youth. Each possibility was worse than the last. As the hours passed, reports arrived like thunderclaps. Outer settlements had been overrun. Civilians were massacred, captured, or vanished into warp-tainted shadows. Small pockets of resistance fought bravely, only to be annihilated or pulled into the void. The 54th Armoured had been destroyed entirely, their banners reduced to ash, and still, there was no sign of Dravik. Rane made a decision. He summoned a squadron of Kasserkin and moved toward the western sector, determined to see for himself what had transpired. The corridors of the fortress echoed under the weight of hurried footsteps and shouted orders, but the deeper he travelled, the quieter the halls became. When they reached the devastated sector, the sight stole his breath. Rubble smouldered under the twin light of the dying sun and the eye above. Craters riddled the streets. The remnants of Cadia's once proud defenders lay twisted in the wreckage, their armour shattered, their bodies broken. The surviving enemy troops moved methodically, claiming the dead as trophies, yet none of them approached the fortress proper. It was then, at the edge of the battlefield, that he saw it. A figure in the shadows, unmarked by the chaos, watching from a ridge as the corpses of Cadia's defenders filled the street below. The figure wore armour familiar in shape, yet disturbingly pristine amid ruin. A helm obscured the face, but the posture, the bearing. Rane's stomach clenched with a mix of recognition and dread. Dravik, Ven's whisper came behind him. The figure did not answer. Instead, it moved, not in retreat, not in attack, but as an observer. Rane's blood ran cold. The realization struck him with the weight of a hammer. The rival commander had not merely failed to reinforce the West. He had chosen this moment, Cadia's moment of greatest vulnerability, to remain apart, to watch, to wait. A sudden tremor ran through the ground. The pylons, the ancient structures anchoring Cadia against the eye, shivered under the psychic pressure emanating from the eye itself. The vibrations were subtle at first, then insistent, an urgent reminder that the world could not withstand another assault. Maroth appeared at his side, her voice low, almost a murmur. "It begins," she said. "The first breach was only the start. The traitor's hand has guided them here, and the eye will not stop." Rane clenched his fists. Rage, despair, and the iron coldness of responsibility coursed through him. If Dravik had betrayed them, it was not merely for power or survival. It was for something larger, something dark, something that sought to rend Cadia from within before the outer enemy could finish the work. He looked to Ven, and the words came hard, like tempered steel. "We fight not only the enemy outside, but the one within. Gather the loyalists. Seal every corridor, every officer, every soldier. Trust no one until we see the truth." Ven nodded, though the set of his jaw betrayed the same unease that had taken root in Rane's mind. "And the signal?" "The signal is hope," Rane said, staring at the distant ruins of the western flank. "But hope will not save us if we cannot see who walks beside us. Prepare the counter-surveys. I want every officer accounted for, every path, every shadow, searched. As they moved through the corridors, the fortress itself seemed to groan beneath the weight of the eye's gaze. In the distance, the first wails of the warp-tainted winds echoed, a sound like 1,000 voices crying for Cadia's end. And somewhere in the darkness, the traitor smiled. The corridors of Casa Mirek had grown colder, not from the lack of heat, the forge fires and reactor cores still hummed, but from the atmosphere that lay heavy with suspicion and the scent of betrayal. Lord Castellan Marius Rahn moved among the officers, each step echoing through halls lined with stone banners and the sigils of a world that had known no peace. He had spent his life training for this, preparing for every conceivable siege, yet nothing could have prepared him for the enemy that had taken root inside Cadia itself. Colonel Venn met him at the entrance to the central command hall. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. Reports from the western flank are worse than we feared. Survivors are being corralled. Some of them loyalists, some not. Rane gritted his teeth. And Dravik? Venn hesitated. No trace. Communications remained silent. The absence was no longer suspicious. It was a threat. Rainey's hand tightened on the hilt of his ceremonial blade, the familiar cold weight grounding him as he moved deeper into the chamber. Officers and advisors were already gathered, debating over maps projected in hololithic light. The tension was palpable, each voice rising, falling, and clawing for attention in the chaos. Then came the High Lord's message. Transmitted through a secure relay, yet cutting through the room like a blade. Rane read it silently. Reorganize defenses. Maintain the planet at all costs. Deviation from Imperial strategy is not permitted. Command decisions will be reviewed post-siege. He looked up, meeting the eyes of his gathered officers. The High Lords care nothing for the bloodshed here, he said. They care only for the balance of power on Terra. And now they demand what we cannot provide, perfection in the face of annihilation. A voice cut across the hall, sharp and infuriating. General Kel Dravik, or at least his name, had returned, though the man himself was conspicuously smug despite the devastation outside. Perfection, Dravik said. We have never had perfection, Castellan. Only survival. And I suggest we take decisive action before waiting for the Emperor's voice to reach us in the debris of Cadia's streets. Rane's eyes narrowed. Every instinct screamed danger. Dravik's words were not counsel. They were a challenge, a test of loyalty disguised as strategy. And what action do you propose? Rane asked, the cold steel of his tone leaving no room for games. Dravik's lips curved in a smile devoid of warmth. An offensive. Push through the east corridor, reclaim the pylons before they falter entirely. Delay, and the outer world dies. Delay, and Cadia dies with them. The room fell into silence. Even the holographic map seemed to hesitate, the coloured markers flickering as if uncertain whether to follow the suggestion. Venn stepped forward, voice tight. It's a trap. We don't know the enemy's strength. We risk annihilation if we commit our reserves. Dravik's gaze flicked to Venn, sharp as a dagger. Or we risk annihilation if we do nothing. Cowardice is as fatal as audacity, Colonel. The debate raged, officers raising points and counterpoints, each word heavy with the knowledge that every choice might be the last. Rane observed in silence, weighing the temperaments, the loyalties, and the motives hidden behind familiar faces. Something about Dravik's insistence pricked at him, a warning he could not yet name. Selara Maroth approached Rane, her step soft against the stone floor. The visions are worsening, she said quietly. The enemy will not stop at the outer defenses. There is a current of intent guiding them, shaping the chaos. And the traitor among us, he knows the paths through the fortress better than any of us. Rane's jaw tightened. He knew that in this hall, surrounded by those sworn to defend Cadia, trust was no longer a guarantee. Even his most loyal officers cast anxious glances at each other, aware that a single misstep could doom them all. The first orders were given. Loyalist units were dispatched to the East Corridor, with Rane and Ven leading the initial assessment teams. Dravik's armoured divisions were ordered to follow, ostensibly reinforcing the push. Yet the subtle curl of Dravik's smile suggested a mind playing a different game, one that could undo them all. As Rane prepared to leave the command hall, the walls themselves seemed to groan, the pylons hum vibrating through the stone like a low, anxious heartbeat. Somewhere deep beneath the fortress, the Psyker's warning came again, carried on the whispers of the warp. Do not trust the shadow beside you. The journey to the eastern corridor was slow, each step measured against the ruined streets below. Fires burned unchecked in several sectors, their smoke spiraling into the ash-laden sky. Civilians moved in panicked lines towards subterranean vaults, guided by medics and servitors. Yet even in these moments, Cadia's strength endured. Soldiers stood resolute on crumbling parapets, refusing to fall back, refusing to surrender. It was in the east that Rane saw the first consequence of Dravik's interference. Defensive positions had been abandoned, barriers left unmaintained, and vital artillery stations unmanned. Reports confirmed what Rane had feared. The offensive Dravik had demanded was already shaping itself into disaster. Loyalist forces were scattered, exposed to enemy fire, and unable to hold a unified line. Rane halted his column. Raising a gauntleted hand to signal a halt, he turned to Ven. We cannot allow this corridor to fall. If it does, the entire eastern line will collapse, and the enemy will be inside the heart of the fortress within hours. Ven's eyes reflected the grim reality. We have only enough troops to hold it temporarily. Reinforcements from the west are gone. The civilians are in danger. And Dravik will follow his own path, Rane interrupted, voice heavy with inevitability. We act as we must. If he betrays us further, we deal with him afterward. Maroth's eyes met his, wide and urgent. I do not know if the enemy outside is stronger than the one inside, but both are patient, both are cunning. You must choose carefully whom you trust with every life here. Rane nodded once, sharply. Every order from this point forward was a gamble, each decision a roll of fate with Cadia itself at stake. The fortress may have survived millennia, but in these hours, the weight of betrayal, the whispers of the warp, and the relentless advance of Abaddon's forces had pushed it to the brink. And somewhere, in the shadows between the walls, the rival commander watched, counting each step, each miscalculation. The first fractures within Cadia's command had been sown. The day would end not with victory, but with a quiet, uneasy fear. A knowledge that the fight was no longer only against Abaddon's forces outside, but against a far more insidious enemy within. The eastern corridor burned, not in the quiet, contained way of a single fire, but as if the very veins of Cadia had been set alight. Flames licked the walls of the ancient casas, smoke curling into the ash-filled sky. Explosions shook the ground beneath the defenders' feet, and the shriek of shattered metal mixed with the cries of the wounded. Lord Castellan Marius Rane moved at the forefront, the weight of command heavy upon him, his armour streaked with soot, blood, and the grime of battle. Colonel Ven's voice crackled through the comms, tight with tension. Eastern defensive line is failing. Artillery positions are destroyed. Forward Kasrkin are pinned, unable to advance or retreat. Casualties mounting exponentially. Rane's jaw tightened. Each casualty was not just a number, but a life. A son or daughter of Cadia. A soldier trained to endure decades of war, now falling to the darkness that pressed ever closer. Even the loyalists seemed fragile against this relentless assault. Yet he could not hesitate. Hesitation was death. He ordered a counter-maneuver, directing Kasrkin squads to flank the enemy's advancing war machines, while heavy bolters and laser guns cut at the swarm of traitor infantry. Somehow, in the midst of chaos, the fortress endured. Soldiers fought with a grim determination born of centuries of siege, yet even their courage could not stem the tide. The enemy pushed forward like a living flood, undeterred by loss, their numbers replenished as if the eye itself poured them forth. Rane's gaze swept the battlefield, searching for Dravik. The rival commander's armoured division should have reinforced the line hours ago. Their absence was a wound in the defence, a deliberate gap that only the enemy could exploit. The thought of betrayal, once abstract, had begun to harden into something tangible, a weight that pressed on Rane's mind even as he shouted orders, moved among the firing lines, and directed the desperate defence. Then came the first sign of the insidious hand within. A squad of Kasrkin, commanded by Captain Hystera, fell back unexpectedly, abandoning a critical artillery emplacement. Reports confirmed the unthinkable. They had received orders not from Rane or Ven, but from Dravik himself. The artillery was left unmanned, the gun crews slaughtered or scattered. The enemy seized the position, turning the guns upon the eastern defenders. Rane's rage was a cold, burning thing. "Seal off the sector," he bellowed. "Do not let them breach further. I will see Dravik myself if I must tear him from the enemy's ranks with my own hands." Ven's eyes were haunted. "We're spread thin, Castellan. Too thin. We cannot hold every point simultaneously. Every step we take exposes another." Maroth appeared beside him, her face pale but resolute. "I have seen it," she said. "The shadows move, guiding the enemy's hand. They are not merely soldiers, Castellan. They are instruments of a will older than Cadia, older than the Imperium. And the traitor, he wields that will as easily as a blade." Rane's grip tightened on his blade. He felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon him, the history of Cadia, of its people, of its victories and defeats. They had endured countless sieges, survived gods and monsters alike. Yet now the fortress itself seemed to tremble under the weight of destiny. And within its walls, a greater betrayal lurked, one that could undo all that centuries of struggle had preserved. The battle raged on through the day and into the dying light of the evening. The defenders fought heroically, their courage illuminating the darkness, yet their losses mounted in horrifying numbers. Entire squads vanished under the concentrated fire of the enemy, their screams echoing down the ruined corridors like a mournful chorus. Rane moved among them, shouting encouragement, issuing orders, and offering what small comfort he could. Each fallen soldier was a personal wound, a testament to the relentless cruelty of war. And then the whispers began, soft, almost imperceptible at first, drifting through the corridors and command posts. Reports from the front confirmed what Rane feared. Officers were acting strangely, making errors uncharacteristic of their training, misreporting positions, delaying critical reinforcements. The hand of betrayal had become tangible, moving like a shadow through the fortress, invisible yet undeniable. Rane paused on a parapet overlooking the chaos below. Fires burned in clusters across the eastern sector, the acrid smoke blotting out the already dim sun. He saw Dravik's division at last, not engaging the enemy with the expected ferocity, but moving with precision that suggested calculation rather than courage. Every step, every maneuver seemed designed not to defend Cadia, but to ensure the collapse of the eastern line. Ven joined him, voice grim. He's not just failing us, he's orchestrating the enemy's advance. Every position they take, every breach, it's deliberate. Ran's eyes hardened. Rage, despair, and grim determination coalesced into a singular focus. Then he will answer for it, he said. If the enemy does not destroy Cadia, I will ensure the traitor pays with his life. Maroth's voice cut through the din, calm but edged with fear. The enemy is not merely Abaddon's forces. The Eye itself watches, twisting fate. And the traitor, he is no longer just a man. He is part of something larger. You cannot face him alone, Castellan. Rane's gaze swept over the battlefield once more. The eastern corridor was a ruin, its defenders reduced to desperate pockets of resistance. Fires licked at the ancient walls, sending smoke spiraling into the sky, blotting out stars and turning day into night. Somewhere, amidst the chaos, the traitor moved like a spectre, unseen but always present. And Cadia trembled. The first real wave of the enemy had been repelled, but at an unbearable cost. Lives lost, positions destroyed, trust fractured beyond repair. The fortress had survived, but only just. And even as night fell, Rane knew the next assault would be worse, more calculated, and more devastating. The enemy had learned, adapted, and the traitor had provided the knowledge to make Cadia's fall inevitable. He turned to Ven, voice low and grim. Prepare the countermeasures. Gather what we can. The next wave will come at dawn, and when it does, we fight not just the enemy outside, but the one within. Ven's nod was tight, acknowledging both the orders and the grim reality behind them. As the fires burned into the night, Rane stood alone on the parapet, staring at the dark horizon. The Eye above pulsed, a malignant heartbeat over the doomed fortress. Shadows shifted among the ruins, whispering of betrayal and death, and somewhere deep within Cadia, the traitor smiled. Night had settled over Kazan-Myrak, but it brought no solace. The fortress lay in uneasy quiet, punctuated by distant explosions and the low, mournful hum of damaged pylons struggling to stabilize. Lord Castellan Marius Rane moved through the corridors with the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon him. The shadows seemed longer now, stretching unnaturally along the walls, moving almost imperceptibly in the corner of his vision. Colonel Ven met him in one of the inner command halls. His uniform was streaked with soot, and his hands trembled slightly as he unrolled new tactical maps. Eastern Corridor has been stabilized for now, he reported, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. But our forces are fractured. Morale is at a breaking point, and there are irregularities in officer conduct. Rane's gaze did not leave the maps, the shifting red markers representing enemy positions, the thin green lines representing his dwindling forces. Irregularities, he asked slowly, already knowing the answer. Ven swallowed. Some units failed to follow orders. Others retreated without reason. Reports suggest conflicting commands, orders from Dravik, though he is supposedly with the Eastern Push. He has interfered with almost every critical movement. The words cut deeper than any lasgun bolt. Rane clenched his fists, feeling the cold metal of his ceremonial blade pressing into his palm. He had trained for centuries, prepared for siege, betrayal, and loss. But the knowledge, that a trusted officer had actively undermined their defenses was a poison beyond preparation. A soft, ethereal voice broke the tension. Kalara Maroth stepped forward, her presence almost unreal in the flickering light of the command hall. "The traitor is not merely a man," she whispered. "He is entwined with forces older than the fortress itself. His mind reaches beyond what is visible, guiding events, shaping them. And he is patient. He waits for the moment to strike decisively." Rane's jaw tightened. "And the men? How do we maintain cohesion when one of our own bends the truth and the orders to his will?" Maroth's gaze swept the room. "You inspire loyalty by action, Castellan, by courage, by clarity in a storm of deceit, but you cannot fight shadows with weapons alone." Rane nodded, absorbing the weight of her words. The fortress had endured countless assaults. The outer worlds had crumbled under siege, and still Cadia stood. But this insidious hand inside the walls, was unlike any enemy he had faced. It moved in silence, in subtle manipulations, in orders that conflicted with reason, in the betrayal of trust itself. Outside, the first warning of the next wave reached them. Scout reports traced enemy movements approaching the western sectors, units reconstructed, regrouped, and methodically advancing. Every movement precise, as if guided by someone who knew the fortress intimately. Rane's mind returned again to Dravik. The rival commander's motivations were no longer obscured by uncertainty. He had not abandoned the fortress out of caution or fear. He had acted deliberately, ensuring Cadia's fractures were exploited, and the knowledge of every corridor, every defensive point, had made the enemy's advance nearly unstoppable. "Prepare the reinforcements," Rane ordered, his voice cold but commanding. "Send squads to the west and east. Civilian evac protocols must continue. Every remaining Kasrkin will fall into position, and find those who still hold loyalty. We cannot afford to trust blindly." Hours passed like centuries. Rane moved among the soldiers, offering encouragement, issuing orders, and silently judging each officer for signs of hesitation or deviation. Fear was thick in the air, heavy and palpable. He could see it in the eyes of the men. Young soldiers barely old enough to remember the sun above their homeworld. Hardened veterans who had survived countless skirmishes, yet whose courage now trembled against the weight of betrayal. Ven approached, voice low. "The men are breaking, Castellan, not because of the enemy, but because of doubt. They do not know whom to trust. Every order is questioned. Every move is second-guessed." Rane's eyes scanned the interior of the fortress, taking in the weary faces, the trembling hands, the silent prayers whispered under the weight of the impossibility. He understood the truth fully now. The enemy outside was merciless, but the enemy within was more deadly. Betrayal was a disease, and it had infected Cadia's heart. Maroth placed a hand on his shoulder. "I see it in the warp," she said. "The traitor does not merely command. He manipulates. He guides the enemy's perception, and he will continue to do so until Cadia falls. Or you strike him down first." Rane closed his eyes briefly, feeling the pulse of the fortress under his feet, the hum of pylons, the distant roar of battle. "Then we strike," he said at last. "The next wave will come, and when it does, we fight as if every life, every breath, every heartbeat matters. Because it does, and I will find the traitor in our midst." The night deepened, carrying the weight of despair and the promise of fury. Outside, enemy forces crept closer, their advance marked by the distant glow of plasma fire and the echoing boom of artillery. Inside, the fortress held, but only barely, and in the quiet shadows, The traitor watched, counting each falter, each hesitation, each moment of doubt. Patience was his weapon, and the fall of Cadia would be complete when the Castellan's resolve faltered even once. Rane knew the cost of hesitation. He had seen it in the bloodied streets, in the lifeless forms of those who had fallen, in the whispers of the warp. But he also knew that resolve, courage, and clarity could turn the tide, if only for a moment. As he stood on the parapet overlooking the burning corridors, staring into the distant horizon where enemy silhouettes shifted like a tide, Rane made a vow. Cadia would endure, or he would ensure the traitor paid with his life before the fortress itself was lost. The night was far from over, and the storm had only just begun. Dawn broke over Casa Mirak in a pale, sickly light. The sky was a dull canvas of ash and smoke, pierced only by the flickering flares of distant artillery fire. Lord Castellan Marius Rane stood atop the parapet, the weight of the fortress pressing down on him, the cries of the wounded echoing through the corridors below. The eastern corridor, once stabilized through desperate measures, now teetered on the brink once more. Reports poured in from every sector. Enemy forces, methodically rebuilt, had advanced into the outer defenses, their movements precise, their attacks coordinated with unnerving efficiency. Casualties were mounting, and the survivors were growing weary, their morale frayed by hours of unrelenting combat. Every man and woman in Cadia's ranks bore the unmistakable fatigue of endless war, yet none wavered in the presence of Rane. Colonel Venn approached, his voice tight. Enemy armor has breached the forward pylons. Artillery is mostly destroyed or captured. We have only token resistance left outside the fortress walls. The traitor's interference is evident in every failure. Even the Kasserkin divisions you reassigned are struggling to hold their ground. Rane's jaw tightened. Then we adapt. Every step they take outside, they will meet resistance here. I will not give them the satisfaction of easy victory. Galara Maroth appeared at his side, her eyes wide with unease. The visions grow darker, Castellan. The traitor's influence is not limited to Cadia's corridors. He reaches into the warp itself, guiding the enemy's perception, twisting them toward our weakest points. If we do not act decisively, we will lose everything. Rane nodded. Then we act decisively. The first external assault began in earnest. Enemy columns surged forward, flamethrowers, bolters, and laser guns cutting swathes through the desolate terrain. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning promethium, each explosion rattling the walls of the fortress like the tolling of a funeral bell. Kasserkin units fired volleys, holding as long as possible, but the enemy was relentless. And then Rane saw them, Dravik's divisions, moving with deliberate precision, guiding enemy units around the remaining defensive strongpoints, ensuring the casualties were maximized. The truth could no longer be denied. The rival commander had betrayed them entirely. Every hesitation, every misstep, every failure had been orchestrated. Venn's voice was tight with disbelief. He's doing this deliberately. He's guiding them, controlling the flow of battle. And we are powerless to stop him. Rane's fists clenched, the ceremonial blade in his hands almost shaking under the weight of his fury. Then we fight not for Cadia alone, but to undo the hand of the traitor. Every Kasserkin, every loyalist, they follow my command or they die. The fighting intensified. The enemy breached the outer barricades, and the fortress's walls shuddered under sustained bombardment. Fires erupted in multiple sectors, smoke spiraling into the sky, blotting out the pale light of the dying sun. Civilians and troops alike scrambled for cover. guided by medics and servitors, but many fell, cut down by precision strikes from enemy war machines and traitor-controlled artillery. Maroth's voice came again, urgent and haunting. "The traitor is here, Castellan. He walks among us even now. Do not trust the officer who lingers too long in the shadows, or the orders that seem too convenient. He knows every corridor, every weak point, every hope we cling to." Rani's gaze swept the battlefield. The fortress groaned under the weight of attack, yet Cadia's defenders, though battered, held as best they could. They were soldiers of steel and resolve trained for centuries, but even the most steadfast were beginning to falter. Then came the signal of impending disaster. A Kasrkin squad, reassigned to reinforce the eastern flank, sent an urgent transmission. Positions compromised, reinforcements redirected, orders unclear, conflict in command. Dravik's orders. Rani's blood ran cold. The officer had betrayed them, but the weaponization of trust went further than he had feared. The enemy's advance was no longer merely a test of strength. It was a manipulation, a deliberate fracturing of Cadia's command. He moved quickly through the fortress corridors, issuing new orders, recalibrating defensive lines, and confronting officers who hesitated too long. Every interaction was a gamble. Every decision could result in death for both the soldier and the fortress. The first breach into the inner defensive perimeter came near the western gate. Enemy columns, guided by the traitor's insight, pushed through the shattered barricades. Bolter fire, laser-gun bursts, and explosions tore through the defenders. Yet Rani led counter-assaults personally, moving from position to position, offering both command and courage. Ven, beside him, whispered, "We cannot hold them for long. Every reinforcement we send seems to vanish into traps laid by Dravik." Rane's eyes scanned the chaos, and he realized the full scope of their predicament. The enemy outside was powerful, but the enemy within, the manipulator, the betrayer, was far deadlier. His divisions were not just failing, they were being weaponized against Cadia itself. Maroth touched his shoulder, her presence cold but steady. "You will have to make a choice, Castellan. Strike at the traitor now, and risk the fortress falling. Or wait, and the fortress may survive a little longer. But your enemy will strengthen." Rane's mind raced. Every option carried weight. Every moment delayed would cost lives. He felt the weight of history, of centuries of sacrifice, pressing on him. Cadia's fall was not a distant possibility. It was a knife poised above every defender's head, guided by both the enemy outside and the one within. The day ended in grim stalemate. Enemy forces had pressed Cadia to the brink in multiple sectors, yet the fortress endured, battered but unbroken. Fires burned across the eastern and western corridors. Smoke spiraled into the sky, and the fortress trembled under the constant psychic pressure of the eye above. And in the shadows between the walls, the traitor watched. Each hesitation, each misstep, each faltering heartbeat of Cadia's defenders was catalogued, counted, and stored. Patience was his weapon, and when the fortress faltered even once, the culmination of his plans would unfold like a blade through flesh. Rane stood on a parapet, staring at the burning horizon. He knew the enemy would return at dawn with greater force, and that every loyalist's courage would be tested beyond endurance. The fortress had survived the first real wave, but only just, and the betrayal that had guided the enemy's hand had only begun to reveal its full power. He clenched his fists around his blade, voice low and resolute. "Cadia survives tonight, and tomorrow we strike back." The morning light was hollow, filtered through the smoke and ash that choked the skies above Casramirak. The fortress, ancient and resolute, seemed to shiver under the weight of the waking day. Lord Castellan Marius Rane moved through the corridors with measured pace, each footfall a muted drumbeat echoing the tension that gripped every officer and soldier. Cadia's defenders had survived the previous day's onslaught, but the cost had been staggering. Colonel Venn met him near the central command hall, fatigue evident in the drawn lines of his face. "The enemy advances faster than anticipated," he said, gesturing toward the hololithic maps. "Every defensive line we stabilize is challenged again within hours. The eastern corridor is nearly at its breaking point, and even the outer barricades we reinforced last night are compromised." Rane's gaze did not leave the display, the red markers moving with merciless precision. Dravik's hand is clear in every failure. Every misstep has been orchestrated, and every casualty serves a purpose he alone understands. Kalara Maroth appeared beside him, her eyes reflecting the grim reality. The traitor is weaving Cadia into the warp as surely as the enemy presses from without. I can feel the psychic pulse. Every act of sabotage amplifies the chaos. The enemy's advance is not merely physical. It is guided, shaped by knowledge no ordinary commander should possess. Rane's jaw tightened. Then we must act decisively. Orders are no longer enough. I will move among the units myself, and I will root out those whose loyalty wavers. The day's assaults began with a deafening roar. Enemy forces, armored and relentless, pressed into the outer defenses. Fire rained down from the sky, bolters and plasma cutting through barricades with precision that suggested guidance beyond mortal skill. The defenders responded, every shot fired, every line held, a testament to centuries of discipline and training. Yet even the most stalwart Kasrkin began to falter, their exhaustion and fear palpable in every hesitant step. Rane moved among them, offering words of encouragement, issuing commands, and standing as both shield and inspiration. Each fallen soldier was a knife through his resolve, yet he could not allow despair to fracture the lines any further. Then came the betrayal's cruelest manifestation. Orders previously given by Dravik, now appearing in intercepted communications, redirected reinforcements to sectors already overrun, leaving critical positions exposed. The enemy capitalized immediately, breaching walls that should have held firm, their advance swift and calculated. Venn's voice was tight with disbelief. He's not merely withholding support, he's orchestrating death, Castellan. Every redoubt that falls, every squad annihilated, it's deliberate. Rane's hands clenched into fists around the hilt of his blade. Rage, frustration, and despair surged through him, yet he tempered his fury with resolve. Then we adapt. We do not falter because one man has chosen treachery. We do not break because the enemy thinks us weak. Maroth's eyes were solemn. The traitor's influence is more than simple orders. He is shaping Cadia's perception, sowing doubt in the minds of loyalists. Even those who survived the assaults question every choice, every strategy. The corruption of trust is complete unless addressed swiftly. The battle escalated. Enemy forces tore into the eastern corridors, overwhelming barricades with brutal precision. Rane personally led counter-assaults, directing fire, moving squads into new positions, and rallying those who hesitated. Every action was a gamble, each moment of indecision a potential death sentence. In one shattered sector, a squad of Kasrkin hesitated, uncertain of the orders they received. Rane moved among them, his voice low, resolute. Cadia endures because we act, because we hold. because we trust not in the shadow beside us, but in the oath we swear. Forward, every life matters, every breath is a testament to our duty. The words seemed to anchor the soldiers, and they advanced, firing into the oncoming enemy, reclaiming barricades even as the outer walls shook under repeated bombardment. Yet the victory was fleeting. The enemy pressed relentlessly, and the knowledge that Dravik's manipulations had guided their movements made each gain feel hollow. Hours passed in unending combat. The fortress trembled under the sustained assault, smoke rising like a storm above the ruined parapets. Casualties mounted, every victory exacting a brutal toll. The traitor's subtle influence continued to manifest, from misdirected orders to compromised positions, turning each act of bravery into a potential trap. Rane paused atop a parapet, surveying the battlefield. His gaze swept the horizon where the enemy advanced, and then the inner corridors where shadows of doubt and treachery festered. The fortress itself seemed to groan under the strain, ancient stone and steel resisting the inevitable collapse. Maroth appeared at his side, her voice barely above a whisper. The traitor grows bolder. He watches, waits, and guides every step. The eye above pulses with their approach, and the warp itself whispers of Cadia's imminent peril. Rane's hand tightened around his blade. Then we endure. We hold. We fight not just for Cadia, but for every soul that calls this fortress home. And we will find him. The traitor will answer for every life lost here. The day ended in grim stalemate. Fires burned across multiple sectors, the air thick with smoke and the echoes of the fallen. Yet Cadia endured. The enemy's assault, though precise and relentless, had been repelled in pockets by the courage of its defenders. But the fortress had suffered, and the cost was written in blood and ash. And in the shadows, the traitor watched. Each hesitation, each faltering heartbeat of the defenders, each small act of confusion and doubt was catalogued, stored, and measured. Patience was his ally, and Cadia's fall was a blade suspended over the hearts of those who would stand against him. Rane turned from the parapet, his eyes set with grim determination. We prepare for the next wave. We fight as if every life, every heartbeat matters, because it does. And when the traitor reveals himself fully, Cadia will still endure, or he will die trying to ensure it falls. The fortress, battered and bloodied, remained upright, but the storm had only just begun. The enemy outside was powerful, and the enemy within was more insidious than ever. And the defenders of Cadia understood, with quiet, terrible clarity, that this fight would demand more than courage. It would demand their very souls. The morning came without mercy. Casa Mirak's horizon burned with the red glow of Promethean fires, and the acrid scent of smoke and blood lingered over every parapet. Lord Castellan Marius Rane stood atop the fortress walls, surveying the devastation. The enemy's second wave had arrived before dawn, moving with terrifying precision. Every Kasrakan division, every artillery emplacement, every squad of loyalists was tested beyond endurance. And through it all, the traitor's influence reached into the fortress like a shadow, shaping the battlefield from within. Colonel Venn approached, his uniform streaked with soot and ash. "Eastern defences are nearly at collapse," he reported, his voice strained but steady. "The enemy anticipates every maneuver. Casualties have doubled since first light, and there are reports of conflicting orders again. Officers are hesitating, unsure whom to follow." Rane's jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Then we take control. Every hesitation will end in action. Every soldier will know that in Cadia, indecision is death, and loyalty is the only shield against annihilation." Maroth's gaze followed him. The traitor grows bolder. He moves not only through orders, but through perception. His influence twists every act of caution into failure, every act of courage into potential disaster. The warp itself whispers of his hand guiding this assault. Rane's expression darkened. Then we fight as one. Every loyalist must know that they are not alone in this. Every act of courage will be amplified by trust, not corrupted by shadows. The enemy advanced in waves, columns of armor and infantry pressing against the outer barricades. Bolters spat fire, laser guns seared through smoke, and the walls of Cadia shook with the force of explosions. The first breach came near the southern bastion, where a Kasrakin squad faltered under unexpected fire. Rane personally intervened, rallying the defenders with a voice that cut through the chaos like a blade. "Hold the line, forward. Every life matters. Every breath counts." His words ignited a spark of resistance. Soldiers moved with renewed precision, reclaiming barricades even as the walls shuddered under repeated bombardment. But the cost was immediate and brutal. Every counterattack revealed the enemy's foreknowledge. Strategically placed ambushes, coordinated artillery fire, and flanking maneuvers guided by insight only a traitor could provide. Dravik's divisions, once allies in the defense, were conspicuously absent or misdirected, ensuring that Cadia's defenders remained stretched to the breaking point. Ven's voice was low, tight with disbelief. "Every move we make, every position we reinforce, it's already accounted for. The enemy knows our strength and weakness alike. And the traitor, he is within our midst, watching every action." Rane's eyes scanned the battlefield, locking on the outer walls where loyalists held firm despite exhaustion. The fortress trembled beneath the assault, ancient stone echoing with the screams of the wounded and the roars of relentless artillery. He knew that the enemy outside, though powerful, would not succeed without guidance from within. And then came the first undeniable proof of betrayal. A sudden, catastrophic failure in the Eastern artillery network. Orders transmitted through the chain of command had been altered, targeting friendly positions. Bolter fire, intended to suppress advancing enemy armor, instead struck Cadia's own barricades, decimating squads of loyalists. Smoke and fire spiraled into the sky, and the cries of the fallen reached Rane's ears as a chorus of anguish. Maroth's voice was soft but sharp. "The traitor has revealed himself in action, not merely in words. The officers you trusted, they act under his influence, whether they know it or not. Cadia's defenses are being torn apart from within." Rane's chest tightened. He had expected treachery, but the tangible horror of it, the deliberate sacrifice of lives for calculated advantage, struck a chord of rage and despair that shook him to the core. "Then he will answer," he said, voice grim. "I will find him among the shadows, and he will pay with his life for every soul lost today." The battle raged into the afternoon. Enemy armor breached secondary walls, forcing hand-to-hand combat in corridors that had once been considered secure. Kasrakin squads fought valiantly, yet exhaustion, fear, and the insidious guidance of the traitor turned every encounter into a desperate gamble. Rane moved among them, directing fire, shoring up defenses, and personally cutting down intruders where necessary. At one point, a squad of Dravik's officers arrived, ostensibly to reinforce a breached sector. Rane's intuition screamed that something was wrong. He moved closer, observing the officers' hesitation and subtle signals exchanged with enemy units. It was a cruel, silent confirmation. Dravik had not only sabotaged the fortress, but had placed agents in positions of authority to manipulate every move. Ven's whisper reached him, trembling. We cannot trust anyone but those we see fight with their own hands. Even the orders. Every message could be poisoned. Rane's jaw set, resolve sharpening. Then we fight with what we know to be true. Loyalty, courage, duty. And we will find him, the traitor, before Cadia falls completely. As night fell, the fortress stood battered but unbroken. Fires burned across every sector, smoke rising in plumes that blotted out the pale stars above. Cadia's defenders clung to survival, each breath a testament to endurance, each heartbeat a defiance against the betrayal that had guided the enemy's hand. In the shadows, Dravik watched. His plans had borne fruit. Confusion, fear, and distrust now permeated Cadia's ranks. The fortress was fraying at the edges, and the seeds of collapse had been planted. Yet even he could not anticipate the full measure of the Castellan's resolve. The storm within Marius Rane that would not break, no matter the cost. And so Cadia endured, but the battle was far from over. Every night brought new losses, every dawn a test of will. And in the distance, the eye above pulsed like a malignant heartbeat, marking the slow unraveling of a fortress that had once seemed eternal. The air above Casimirak hung heavy with the acrid stench of smoke, blood, and ozone. Dawn broke in fractured shards of grey and orange, revealing the ruinous aftermath of the previous day's relentless assaults. Lord Castellan Marius Rane stood upon the fortress walls, eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon for any sign of respite, yet none came. Every sector he could see trembled under the weight of enemy bombardment, and every hour revealed the cruel precision of the traitor's hand. Colonel Ven approached him, exhausted and pale, the strain of command etched into his features. "The enemy has regrouped faster than we anticipated," he said. "Even the barricades reinforced overnight are under assault. Casualties among the Kasrkin are mounting, and there are troubling reports of further insubordination. Officers diverting units or refusing orders outright." Rane's hands clenched, the ceremonial hilt of his blade cold beneath his fingers. "Then we fight as if the traitor does not exist. Every loyalist will hold the line, or I will ensure they answer for hesitation personally. Cadia's survival depends on clarity, not doubt." Maroth stepped beside him, her eyes reflecting the weight of foresight. "The traitor does not merely sabotage orders, Castellan. He poisons perception, whispering into the minds of the hesitant, guiding the enemy, and undermining loyalty. Every choice you make must counter not only the enemy outside, but the insidious corruption within." Rane's gaze swept the battlefield. Smoke rose in spirals above shattered fortifications, and distant artillery fire shook the ground beneath his feet. "Then we adapt," he said, voice low but resolute. "Every move, every counterattack will be executed with precision, and we will root out the traitor no matter how deeply he has burrowed into Cadia's heart." The enemy's next assault came with the inevitability of a tide. Armoured columns surged against outer barricades, plasma and bolter fire cutting through reinforced walls, tearing apart what little remained of pre-dawn defences. Kasrkin divisions fought desperately, yet even the most seasoned soldiers faltered under the coordinated pressure, each hesitation exploited by the subtle guidance of traitorous commands. Rane moved. Among the defenders, his presence a focal point of resolve. He issued orders with authority, personally directing counter-assaults and inspiring those who wavered. But every victory was fleeting. Breaches occurred in unexpected sectors, and reinforcements were misdirected, leaving loyal soldiers vulnerable. Dravik's influence was absolute, shaping the flow of battle from within, Ven's voice trembled with urgency. The eastern barricades, they've collapsed again. Dravik's officers have been redirecting squads, isolating units. Entire sections are now at risk of encirclement. Rane's jaw tightened. Then we consolidate. Every soldier must know that their position is sacred. Every life matters, but no one can retreat without order. We will hold the core sectors at all costs. As the day wore on, a new horror revealed itself. A squad of Dravik's officers appeared at a secondary command post, claiming to bring reinforcements. Rane's instinct screamed that something was wrong. He watched as subtle signals were exchanged, glances shared, movements coordinated with enemy units. It was the unmistakable proof. The traitor's hand had extended deeper than anyone had realized, embedding agents into critical positions, turning Cadia's own command into a weapon against itself. Maroth's voice, soft and urgent, cut through the chaos. Castellan, the warp senses Cadia's weakening resolve. The traitor's influence grows stronger as uncertainty spreads. Every falter will compound the danger. You must act decisively before his machinations destroy us from within. Rane's gaze swept the corridors, counting each loyalist, each hesitant officer, each soldier whose eyes betrayed uncertainty. He felt the crushing weight of responsibility, the centuries of history resting on his shoulders. "Then we act," he said finally. "I will confront those whose loyalty is in question. Every hesitation must be answered. Every betrayal must be extinguished." The afternoon passed in a blur of combat. Fire erupted in the southern bastion as enemy columns breached secondary barricades. Bolter fire tore through corridors, and hand-to-hand combat erupted in the narrow passages, every strike a desperate act of survival. Rane led personally, carving a path through the chaos, rallying units, and stabilizing breaches wherever possible. Yet the fortress groaned under the relentless assault, and every victory seemed temporary. A sudden alert arrived from the northern sector. Dravik's men had manipulated artillery coordinates, redirecting a devastating salvo into one of Cadia's inner barracks. Smoke and flame engulfed the structure, and the cries of trapped soldiers reached Rane like a physical blow. The betrayal was no longer subtle. It was manifest, deliberate, and lethal. Ven's voice was barely audible over the cacophony. "The traitor is within our midst. He controls both the battlefield and the flow of command. We cannot predict his moves. He has turned our own forces into weapons against us." Rane's jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Then we confront him. Every order he has corrupted will be unraveled. Every officer in doubt will be tested. And when I find Dravik, he will pay for every life lost under his treachery. As night fell, the fortress stood battered, its walls scarred by fire and plasma, smoke spiraling into the sky like the omen of Cadia's slow unraveling. Yet even in the darkness, there was defiance. Loyalists tended the wounded, reinforced barricades and prepared for the next assault. Cadia's heart still beat, fierce and unyielding, even as betrayal and despair gnawed at his edges. In the shadows, Dravik observed. His plan had sown chaos and doubt, yet he knew the Castellan's resolve was not so easily broken. Patience would be required. The fortress might endure for now, but the seeds of ruin had been planted, and Cadia's fall, though not immediate, was now inevitable unless Rane could root out the traitor and restore order. Rane stood upon the parapet, staring at the horizon where fires burned and the enemy amassed. He knew the coming days would demand more than courage. They would demand the very essence of loyalty, sacrifice, and unyielding resolve. And he vowed silently that, no matter the cost, he would confront the shadow in their midst before Cadia succumbed completely. The dawn over Casa Myrak was a brittle light, filtered through smoke that had settled into a permanent haze over the fortress. The air was thick with the scent of ash, burning promethium, and the ever-present copper tang of blood. Lord Castellan Marius Rane walked the outer walls, eyes scanning the horizon where enemy forces amassed like a tide, eager to engulf all that Cadia still held. Each day's fight seemed heavier than the last, each hour more perilous, yet the fortress still stood. Colonel Venn met him near the central command hall, face drawn and hands trembling slightly. "Casualties continue to mount," he said quietly. "The Kasrakin divisions are exhausted, morale frayed, and there are reports of officers acting contrary to orders again. Some are refusing commands outright, citing confusion and fear." Rane's jaw tightened. "Then we lead. Every man and woman must know that loyalty is not a choice, but a shield. Every hesitation will cost lives, and I will not permit cowardice or treachery to dictate Cadia's fate." Silara Maroth approached, her eyes reflecting the psychic resonance of the fortress itself. "The traitor is moving swiftly, Castellan. His agents are embedded deeper than we feared. Every misstep, every delayed command, every moment of doubt among your officers strengthens him, and the warp echoes with his influence, guiding the enemy like a predator shaping the hunt." Rane's gaze swept the battlefield. Smoke curled above the shattered battlements, flares from enemy artillery punctuating the ruined skyline. "Then we act decisively. We cannot merely defend. We must counterstrike where the enemy expects least, reclaim what they believe is theirs, and expose the traitor wherever he hides." The first assault of the day shattered the fragile calm. Enemy forces, guided by Dravik's subtle manipulations, pressed against the southern defences, armoured columns moving with unerring precision. Kasrkin units fired volleys, bolters and laser guns shredding enemy lines. Yet even the most disciplined soldiers were vulnerable to the careful exploitation of their positions. Every step they took was anticipated, every barricade they held threatened by insider knowledge. Venn's voice was strained. "Southern Bastion is faltering. Reinforcements have been misdirected again. Officers from Dravik's command. They are guiding enemy movements, sowing chaos." Rane's fists clenched. "Then we strike at the heart of this corruption. Every false order must be corrected immediately. Every officer in doubt must be tested. And when Dravik is found, he will pay with every breath he has stolen from Cadia's defenders." As the day progressed, catastrophe struck. A breach occurred at the eastern gate, where Dravik's subtle guidance had created a perfect funnel for the enemy. Loyalist forces, unaware of the trap, advanced only to be cut down or encircled. The walls shook under bombardment, and the screams of the fallen echoed through the corridors. Rane moved swiftly, directing squads to contain the breach, personally leading counter-assaults, but each step forward came with horrific cost. Maroth's voice cut through the chaos. "The traitor's hand is here, Castellan. Officers you trust are compromised, either unwittingly or by choice. Every moment of hesitation, every misplaced trust strengthens him." Rane's eyes narrowed. He moved to the sector's command post, confronting the officers whose hesitation had allowed the breach. Subtle glances, withheld reports, and delayed communications confirmed his suspicions. Dravik's influence had turned part of Cadia's command against itself. Fury and despair threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced it down, focusing on survival and strategy. "Cadia will not fall to whispers in the shadows," he said, voice low and cutting through the din. "Every loyalist will know that hesitation kills, and betrayal is met with fire. The fighting intensified. Bolter fire echoed through the corridors. Flamers ignited debris and bodies alike, and the fortress trembled under repeated bombardment. The outer walls groaned as enemy armor pressed forward relentlessly, exploiting every weak point exposed by Dravik's manipulation. Yet Rane's personal intervention stabilized critical sections, buying precious hours for the defenders. Ven approached, voice tight. Casualties are catastrophic, Castellan. We cannot hold this pace indefinitely. Morale is fractured, and fear is spreading through the ranks. Rane's eyes scanned the battlements, locking on the weary soldiers, the exhausted Kasrakin, and the medics tending the wounded. Then we inspire them, he said. We lead by example. Every life preserved, every breach repaired, every act of courage is defiance. And when Dravik is found, he will witness that Cadia's defenders do not break easily. By nightfall, the fortress remained upright, though battered and bloodied. Fires burned across multiple sectors, smoke spiraling into the sky as if mocking the stars themselves. Cadia's heart still beat, though heavily strained, each wall and turret a testament to centuries of resilience. And in the shadows, Dravik observed. His manipulation had reached its zenith for the day, but the Castellan's unyielding resolve had thwarted the final collapse. Patience, he reminded himself, was still the ally of the treacherous. The fortress would weaken in time, and when it did, every act of defiance, every ounce of courage, would be tested to its limit. Rane stood atop a parapet, staring at the horizon where fires burned and enemy forces regrouped. He understood now more than ever that the fight was not just against the enemy outside, but against the enemy within. Every decision, every order, every heartbeat mattered, and the price of failure would be measured in countless lives. Yet he vowed silently. Cadia would endure, and he would see Dravik's treachery punished, no matter the cost. The first light of dawn barely pierced the smoke-choked sky above Casimirak. The fortress, battered and bloodied from weeks of relentless assault, seemed to sag under the weight of its own history. Each wall, each parapet, was scarred with fire and bolter impact, each corridor a testament to endurance and sacrifice. Lord Castellan Marius Rane moved with careful deliberation, his eyes scanning sectors that teetered on the brink of collapse. Every day had become a test of will, every moment a gamble with life and death. Colonel Ven met him near the command center, his uniform streaked with soot and the blood of the fallen. The enemy is concentrating their assault on the northern bastion, he said, voice tight. Our forces there are stretched thin, and Dravik's officers continue to misdirect reinforcements. Casualties are catastrophic. Morale is fraying even among the most loyal. Rane's jaw tightened. Then we hold with what we know to be true. Loyalty, courage, and the knowledge that every hesitation costs lives. We fight for Cadia, not for convenience or comfort. Marth's gaze followed him, her eyes reflecting both psychic resonance and concern. The traitor grows bolder, Castellan. His influence has now reached the northern corridors, and I sense officers hesitating or acting under his subtle control. Every moment of indecision compounds the danger. The warp whispers of Cadia's impending doom, and the enemy presses with relentless precision. Rane's hands clenched around the hilt of his blade. Then we act decisively. Every unit will know its orders are immutable, every breach countered immediately, and the traitor, Dravik, will answer for this carnage. The enemy's assault began before the sun had fully risen. Armored columns and infantry waves surged against northern barricades, moving with calculated precision that betrayed guidance beyond mortal skill. Bolter fire and laser guns tore through the smoke, while flamers ignited debris and bodies alike. Kasrkin units fought with discipline, yet even the most experienced soldiers faltered under the relentless, coordinated pressure. Ven's voice was tight. Northern Bastion is collapsing, Castellan. Dravik's manipulations have created a perfect funnel for enemy armor and infantry. Casualties are unsustainable. Rani's gaze swept the battlefield, noting every breach, every hesitation, every sign of faltering loyalty. He moved among the defenders, issuing orders personally, rallying squads, and reinforcing faltering barricades. Yet the cost was immediate and horrific. Units were decimated in ambushes, entire squads cut down by well-placed artillery and plasma fire. Maroth's voice was a warning. The traitor's hand is everywhere, Castellan. Officers you trust have been corrupted, and the warp amplifies his influence. Every moment of doubt threatens the entire fortress. Rane's expression darkened. Then we fight, not for hope, but for survival. Every loyalist must act with clarity and courage, and I will root out the traitor myself if necessary. As the day wore on, catastrophe struck the northern sector. A key Kasrkin unit, sent to reinforce a breach, was annihilated by misdirected artillery, orders intentionally corrupted by Dravik's agents. Smoke and flame engulfed the sector, and the cries of the fallen echoed through the fortress corridors. The betrayal was now undeniable, and its cost could not be measured merely in lives. It shook the very morale of Cadia's defenders. Ven approached, voice barely audible. The northern corridors are lost, Castellan. We cannot sustain this pace. Entire sections of the fortress are in jeopardy. Dravik's influence has reached the heart of our command structure. Rane's jaw clenched, rage and despair intertwining. Then we consolidate what remains. We defend the core sectors with every ounce of strength. Every Kasrkin, every officer who remains loyal, must understand that their lives are sacred only if they act decisively. The traitor will not win while I draw breath. The enemy pressed forward, exploiting every weakness revealed by the traitor's manipulations. Cadia's walls groaned, bolter fire erupted in continuous volleys, and hand-to-hand combat became unavoidable in corridors previously deemed secure. Rane personally led counter-assaults, stabilizing breaches and reclaiming lost ground. Yet every action carried a deadly cost. Night fell, and with it came grim realization. The fortress, though still standing, had been carved and scarred like a body that had survived countless wounds. Fires burned across multiple sectors, smoke obscuring the stars and turning the sky into a blood-red dome. Cadia's defenders were exhausted, morale teetered, and the fortress's endurance was now a fragile thread. Dravik observed from the shadows, a cruel satisfaction in his eyes. The day had proven that even the strongest of walls could be eroded from within. The fortress would weaken further, and with patience and precision, he would guide it to its ultimate collapse. Yet even he could not foresee the Castellan's unbroken spirit, the burning resolve that still held Cadia together in defiance of betrayal and fire. Rane stood atop the northern parapet, staring at the horizon where enemy forces regrouped. His mind was a tempest of strategy, fury, and the ever-present weight of responsibility. He knew the coming days would demand more than courage. They would demand the very essence of loyalty, sacrifice, and unyielding resolve. And he vowed silently, no matter the cost, Cadia would endure, and the traitor would face justice before the fortress fell completely. The sky above Casa Merak was a churning mass of fire and shadow, clouds blackened by smoke, pierced by the flickering red light of distant Promethean fires. Cadia's walls groaned beneath the weight of relentless bombardment, each strike tearing at centuries of stone, steel, and history. Lord Castellan Marius Rani stood on the central bastion, the wind carrying the acrid tang of burning metal and flesh into his lungs. Every breath was a reminder of what was at stake, every heartbeat a measure of the fortress's endurance. Colonel Venn approached, his face pale beneath layers of soot. Castellan, the northern bastion is completely lost. Enemy forces have breached through Dravik's manipulations. Casualties are immense. Morale is fracturing even among the most loyal Kasrkin units. Rane's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the devastation. Then we make a stand where we can. Every sector that remains must be fortified. Every act of courage must be magnified. Cadia will not fall without blood and fire marking its defiance. Maroth stepped to his side, her expression grave. The traitor's influence is at its peak, Castellan. Dravik has consolidated his control over multiple command points. Officers who remain ostensibly loyal are tainted by doubt and confusion. And the warp, it roars with his triumph, amplifying every falter. Rane's hands tightened around the hilt of his blade. Then he will be confronted. Every corrupted officer will be tested. Every betrayal rooted out. Dravik will pay for every life lost under his hand. The enemy's assault surged with renewed ferocity. Armored columns advanced across broken battlements, and infantry waves pressed forward with merciless precision. Bolter fire and laser guns erupted, cutting swathes through advancing ranks, yet every gain by Cadia's defenders seemed fleeting. Every breach revealed the insidious perfection of Dravik's planning, every hesitation magnified by internal treachery. Venn's voice trembled. Castellan, the eastern corridor. Officers there. They've betrayed us. Enemy armor is already inside the sector. Reinforcements have been diverted. We cannot stop them. Rane's eyes blazed. Then we go to them. Every loyalist who remains will follow me. We will strike the traitor's hand directly. Cadia's survival depends on it. Amidst the chaos, Rane led a select contingent of Kasrkin through collapsed corridors and smoke-filled halls, moving toward the eastern sector where betrayal had allowed enemy forces to penetrate. Bolter fire seared the walls, and the echoes of falling stone and dying soldiers reverberated like a funeral drum. At the heart of the chaos, they found Dravik himself, orchestrating the slaughter with meticulous precision, his presence a fulcrum of destruction. Rane's voice cut like a blade. "Dravik, your treachery ends here." The traitor turned, eyes cold and calculating, a faint smirk on his face. "Ah, Castellan Rane, I wondered when you would arrive. Cadia cannot survive its own shadows, and I merely guided them to their inevitable conclusion." Rane's blade ignited with a psychic resonance, a symbol of authority and fury. Then we test that inevitability. The battle that followed was a storm of fury and steel. Rane and his loyal Kasrkin fought through Dravik's inner guard, each step a battle against betrayal and chaos. Bolter fire and chain swords clashed in tight corridors, the screams of the fallen echoing like the chorus of a funeral hymn. Dravik moved with practiced precision, exploiting every hesitation, yet Rane's resolve was unshakable. Every strike he delivered, every maneuver he commanded, was infused with the knowledge that loyalty and courage must triumph over deception. Yet the fortress itself groaned under the assault, walls crumbling, corridors filled with smoke and flame. Finally, in the inner command chamber, Rane confronted Dravik directly. The traitor's hand was swift, but Rane's fury matched every strike. Sparks and fire danced across the chamber as their blades clashed, each blow reverberating with the weight of betrayal and the hope of salvation. "You will not see Cadia fall," Rane growled, striking with precision born of desperation and resolve. "Every life lost under your hand will be avenged." Dravik's smirk faltered. "Cadia is already dying, Castellan. Even if I fall, the seed of doubt and betrayal I've planted will ensure its collapse. You cannot save what has already been poisoned." Rane's blade found its mark, cutting through armor and flesh, and Dravik fell, his body slumping against shattered stone. Yet even in death, the weight of betrayal lingered. The fortress had been carved by internal corruption, and Cadia's defenders were shattered. The central bastion, though still held by loyalists, was a monument to loss. Fires burned across every sector, smoke spiraled into the sky, and the cries of the wounded echoed endlessly. Cadia's heart still beat, but it was wounded, and the cost of survival had been measured in countless lives. Rane stood amid the ruin, breathing heavily, eyes scanning the horizon. Victory had been claimed over the traitor, but at a terrible cost. Cadia's walls were scarred, her defenders exhausted, and her future uncertain. And yet, even as despair gnawed at the edges of hope, Rane's resolve remained unbroken. The fortress would endure, but the cost of loyalty, sacrifice and survival had never been clearer. The sky above Casamerak had become an infernal canvas of flame and smoke. The horizon was a jagged silhouette of shattered fortresses and smouldering craters, the remnants of countless assaults and failed defences. Lord Castellan Marius Rane stood atop the central bastion, surveying a battlefield that seemed to bleed despair itself. Every wall, every tower bore the scars of relentless siege. Every corridor reeked of fire, blood, and the bitter tang of betrayal. Colonel Venn approached, his face lined with exhaustion and grief. "Castellan, the breaches continue to widen. Supplies are nearly gone. The Kasrkin are decimated, and morale is at its lowest. Even the most loyal are questioning whether Cadia can endure." Rane's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon where enemy forces pressed forward with calculated inevitability. "Then we fight, not because victory is certain, but because survival demands it. Every loyalist must know that hesitation now is death, and that Cadia's heart beats in their hands." Maroth's voice, quiet yet resonant, carried across the parapet. "Castellan, the warp screams with the power of the enemy's will. Even with Dravik defeated, the seed of betrayal has grown within Cadia's walls. Your people are fractured. Fear spreads faster than courage can bind it. The choice before you is dire." Rane's hands clenched on the hilt of his blade. "Then we make the choice clear. Every decision, every command, every sacrifice must be made now. Cadia's legacy depends not on the number of walls still standing, but on the courage of those who remain." The enemy's final assault came like a tidal wave of steel and fire. Armored columns surged across shattered battlements. Infantry pressed forward through crumbling corridors, and artillery tore chunks from walls that had withstood centuries. Kasrkin units, though fierce, were stretched beyond endurance, their formations splintered by relentless pressure. Venn's voice broke through the chaos. "Castellan, Eastern Sector is lost. Reinforcements cannot reach them. The outer walls are on the verge of collapse." Rane's jaw tightened. "Then we hold the inner core. Every barricade, every corridor, every life will be a testament to resistance. We may die, But Cadia will not surrender while I draw breath. He moved through the corridors alongside Maroth and the most loyal Kasrkin, leading them toward the central command chamber where the final defensive lines were forming. Each step was a testament to discipline and sacrifice, every firefight a struggle against inevitability itself. Bolter fire and plasma lances lit the corridors in brief, violent flashes, illuminating shattered stone and fallen soldiers alike. As they reached the inner sanctum, Rane saw the depth of devastation. The command chambers were in ruins, officers and soldiers alike struggling to maintain control over units now scattered and demoralized. Dravik's legacy of treachery lingered even in death, and the fortress's defenders were stretched to the limits of endurance. Maroth's voice was urgent. "Castellan, we cannot hold indefinitely. The enemy concentrates on the core. Every second counts. Decisions must be absolute." Rane nodded grimly. "Then the choices are clear. We hold the central bastion at all costs, and we prepare for the sacrifice necessary to ensure Cadia survives, even if its walls fall." The final battle began with a roar that shook the foundations of the fortress. Loyalists fought in desperate, unyielding waves, throwing themselves against superior enemy numbers to buy time and cover evacuation routes. Every corridor became a crucible. Every breach demanded personal intervention. Rane led charges personally, striking down enemy commanders, rallying Kasrkin, and holding the line where others would falter. Ven fell beside him, mortally wounded by a plasma lance that tore through armor. With his last breath, he whispered, "Castellan, Cadia must survive." Rane caught him, sorrow and rage blending into an unbreakable resolve. "It will, Ven. It will. Your sacrifice will not be in vain." Maroth, sensing the final approach of the enemy, guided Rane through warp whispers, helping him anticipate the next assaults. The corridors burned around them, and every step forward carried the weight of centuries. Loyalists held their ground, knowing that their choices now determined not only survival, but the honor of all who had fallen. The enemy finally breached the central bastion. A tide of armored warriors and traitorous officers surged forward. Yet Rane and the remaining loyalists met them with unyielding ferocity. Blades clashed, bolters roared, and the corridors became a furnace of death and defiance. Every act of courage, every desperate maneuver pushed Cadia's defenders closer to the edge of annihilation. In the climactic confrontation, Rane faced the last surviving agents of Dravik's treachery. The battle was swift, brutal, and merciless. Each strike exacted a cost. Each victory demanded a sacrifice. By the end, the central command chambers were silent, filled only with the echo of death and the labored breaths of the few who remained. Cadia had survived, but it had been carved down to its bones. Rane stood amid the ruin, surveying the devastation. The walls were scorched, the corridors littered with fallen friends and enemies alike. Cadia's heart still beat, but only barely, and the cost of survival had been absolute. Every act of loyalty, every sacrifice had shaped the fortress's continued existence, yet the shadow of betrayal lingered as a reminder that even victory could be poisoned. Maroth placed a hand on his shoulder. "Castellan, the fortress endures, but at a terrible cost. Cadia's defenders are few, its walls shattered, and the echoes of betrayal will remain long after the fires die. You have preserved the heart, but the body is broken." Rane's eyes swept the horizon, the smoking battlefield reflecting the weight of loss. "Then we endure, Maroth. We survive, because Cadia's spirit is not in stone and steel, but in those who fight for it. Let the galaxy remember, even in betrayal, Even in fire, we rise, we resist, and we endure. And as the last light of day faded behind a horizon of ruin, the surviving loyalists of Cadia held their ground, weary, blooded, yet unbroken, a testament to the unyielding heart of a fortress that had been forged through sacrifice, loyalty, and the bitterest trials. The sun rose slowly over a horizon painted in ash and fire. Where once Casa Mirak had stood as the indomitable heart of Cadia, only smouldering ruins and shattered walls remained. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant moans of survivors and the faint hiss of dying fires. The fortress that had endured countless wars, rebellions and betrayals now lay broken. Its once proud towers collapsed into rubble, its corridors choked with smoke and blood. Lord Castellan Marius Rane moved among the survivors, his armour scorched, his body aching, but his resolve unyielding. The cost had been incalculable. Thousands of loyalists lost, centuries of history erased, and the very heart of the Cadian spirit scarred forever. Every step through the ruins was a reminder that survival had been purchased with unimaginable sacrifice. Colonel Venn had not survived the final onslaught, nor had countless others whose names and deeds would now be carried only in memory. Maroth walked beside him, her eyes reflecting the psychic echoes of a fortress that had fought to endure even in the face of overwhelming betrayal and destruction. "The outer walls are gone, Castellan," she said quietly. "The enemy controls the approaches. Only the inner sanctum still stands, barely, and the forces there are fragmented. Cadia, as we knew it, is no more." Ron's gaze swept across the devastated landscape. "Then what remains," he said slowly, "is not stone and steel, but the spirit of those who fought and died for it. Cadia's legacy is not measured in walls, but in courage, in sacrifice, in loyalty. Even in ruin, that spirit endures. The enemy forces, though victorious in a strategic sense, approached cautiously. They had expected total annihilation, yet the few remaining loyalists held the inner sanctum with tenacity born of desperation. The bastion was no longer a fortress. It was a crucible, and those within it bore witness to the final cost of centuries of defense. Marth's voice trembled, the psychic strain of so much death evident. "Castellan, we have survived, but at what cost? Cadia's people, its soldiers, many are gone. The fortress itself will never rise again. Even if the enemy leaves, what remains is ashes and memories." Rane knelt among the wounded, touching the faces of those who had endured the impossible. "We endure," he whispered. "That is all we can do. We endure because the sacrifice of those who fell must mean something. Their courage, their loyalty, their lives. They are the foundation on which the spirit of Cadia rests, and it will be remembered." A great silence fell, as though the universe itself mourned the shattered bastion. The stars above, dimmed by the smoke of the fires below, seemed to watch with cold indifference. Yet even among the ruins, there was a flicker of defiance, a stubborn heartbeat that refused to yield entirely to despair. Dravik's treachery had been defeated, yet his legacy remained in the chaos he had sown. The fortress had been torn apart from within, its walls crumbled by both enemy might and human frailty. Still, Rane understood that this too was a lesson, a testament to the cost of vigilance, loyalty, and the bitter price of immortality when faced with betrayal. The surviving loyalists gathered atop the inner parapet, watching the horizon where the enemy forces slowly withdrew, their objective won, but their conquest incomplete. Cadia had fallen in form, but its soul, tempered by fire and blood, remained unbroken. Rane looked upon the faces of those who remained, weary, scarred, and trembling from the horrors they had witnessed. "Remember this day," he said, voice steady despite the weight of grief. "Remember the fallen. Remember the sacrifices. Cadia's walls may crumble, but the courage within us, that cannot die. We carry it forward, and in it we are eternal." Maroth placed a hand on his shoulder. "Even in ruins, Castellan, the spirit endures. And in that, perhaps, there is hope." Rani's eyes swept the horizon one final time. The fortress was broken, but the people, the legacy, and the memory of Cadia remained alive. Though centuries of history had been scarred, though betrayal had carved deep wounds, though the cost had been unbearable, the heart of Cadia still beat in those who would tell its story. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its final light across the smoking ruins, Rane allowed himself a moment of reflection. Immortality is not in stone or steel, he thought, but in spirit. Loyalty and courage outlive the walls that contain them. Betrayal can wound, wars can destroy, empires can fall, yet the essence of what was defended endures, even in ashes. And so, with the fortress of Casimirak in ruins, the surviving defenders stood together atop what remained, a solemn testament to sacrifice, courage, and the tragic beauty of a world ripped apart, yet refusing to yield completely to despair. Cadia was lost, yet its spirit, carried by those who survived, would echo through the galaxy for eternity, a mournful song of loyalty, sacrifice, and the cost of defiance against both enemies and betrayal.